Hello, class. Welcome to our opener for Chapter 7. Mainly what we're looking at is just a review of topics that we've dealt with before. There's a few things about angles near the end of the lesson that you want to pay attention to. Otherwise, these are all things that you should have seen earlier in the semester, or at least before winter break. First thing to look at is just solving equations. Remember, you have to do order of operations backwards. Okay, so adding and subtracting is the least important. So the first thing to do is to get rid of plus 5 on both, or to get rid of this plus 5 by doing its opposite. Okay, or inverse operation, which is minus 5 on both sides. I should get 4x because the plus 5 and minus 5 go away, and that's 15. And then to get rid of multiplication, I'm going to do division. Now remember, 15 over 4 is not actually that bad of an answer. It's an improper fraction. That's a decent answer as we keep moving forward. Realize that's also 3 3/4 or 3.75. All three of those could be used at different times, so just be careful on that as you're looking at those situations. The next one, to get rid of plus 2, I'm going to subtract 2 on both sides. Remember, these are both negative here on the right, so negative 4 and a minus 2 is both negative, so it's kind of a keep, change approach. They're both negative, so you add them together, and that becomes a negative 6. And then to get rid of divide by 5, you need to multiply by 5 on both sides, and you get negative 30. Your work should look somewhat similar to this. There's obviously some slight variations, but you should have steps shown about what's there. And those of you that were struggling with that first semester, this is a chance to look at it again. And we need to keep improving about showing our work about solving for variables. The next one is the same idea, except it's an inequality, but the rules don't change in terms of solving. You start with adding and subtracting. So to get rid of plus 2, I'm going to subtract 2 on both sides. The only difference is I have this less than or equal to. Okay, less than or equal to stays with. To get rid of 7 times x, I'm going to divide by 7 on both sides, and I get x less than or equal to 3. Remember, that's a closed circle, and then you want arrow going to the left because it's a less than situation. On the second one, the main piece is the fact that coefficient is negative. So to get rid of plus 5 on both sides, I do minus 5. Then to get rid of multiply by negative 3, I'm going to divide by negative 3. But remember, for inequalities, when I divide or multiply by negative, I had to flip the sign because of the way negative numbers work with multiplication and division. And so this ends up being x less than negative 5, so open circle at negative 5, and then arrow going to the right. You want to make sure that you're paying attention to that idea with inequalities, that you divide by negative or multiply by negative, you flip the sign. The next one is dealing with slope. There's a slope formula. Some of you know that formula, so feel free to use it. Remember, slope by definition is the change in y over the change in x, or the rise over run. These aren't graphed, but you can still do the chart idea, or there's different options. So I got two ways of setting it up. So in this case, I just made a chart with x, y. So I do the change in y first. So to get from 5 to negative 3 is a minus 8, or you could do negative 3 minus 5 to find the difference between them. And then to get from 4 to 8 is plus 4, and so negative 8 divided by 4 would be a negative 2. Remember, for slope, if it's an integer, there's an implied divide by 1, because that means the rise and the run. There has to be a number there on the bottom, otherwise it would be undefined. In the second one, instead of making the chart, I'm just looking at the change in y by looking at this 12, and it goes to 2, which is minus 10. And then from 15 to get to negative 5 is minus 20. And I could do it that way, and I get a slope of 1/2, which means it's rising 1 and running 2 every time. That one has a positive slope, whereas the first one has a negative slope. Next thing we want to look at is just drawing angles. This protractor, there's a PDF available online. I would suggest maybe printing one out and cutting one out so you have a paper copy of one if you don't have your own protractor. Remember, when you're drawing an angle, whatever protractor you use, you need to make sure you know where the vertex of the angle needs to be. So for this, it's where this kind of makes a 90-degree or perpendicular line with this partial line here. That's where the dot needs to be, or the vertex. Now, if I go to the left, I've got my line here, and then I would go up to 34, kind of go around and say, okay, there's 34. I could put a dot there, and I could connect the line as far as I want. I can move the protractor out of the way, actually, at that point if I've got the dot. I don't have to draw it all the way to that point necessarily, but you could if you wanted. If you go from the other side, 34 degrees from here, you have to go just the 34 on the inside track. Okay, remember, 34 degrees is a pretty small angle, so the angle on the left and right are supposed to be the same if drawn appropriately. Okay, sometimes students get going in the wrong direction. They end up with a really large obtuse angle, okay, that's higher than 90. So you want to practice with your protractor. And so for these four situations, I just quickly drew them. Two of them are easy for me to draw. For example, 90 degrees just makes a right angle. And notice I put a box in the corner to represent it's a right angle. And 180 is just a straight line, but it has to have a vertex in the middle because it's two rays connecting to make the to make the angle. And then 55 degrees is an acute angle. I could draw it to the kind of left or right depending on my protractor situation. If I want 160 though, notice that has to go past the 90 and around. Okay, so if I go back to my protractor, I start at 0 if I'm going from the right side. I have to go all the way around to 160, way over here, to be able to draw that angle. So you want to pay attention to that as you're using your protractor. Again, you should print one off if you don't have one and just cut it out. I know it's kind of a crude measuring tool right now, but you're going to need it for Chapter 7. So please cut one out if you don't have one from the PDF that's available online. Okay, your homework has different steps and different questions of things that we've just looked at. So you want to make sure you show your work for two-step equations, inequalities, finding slopes, things of that nature. These should all be things that we keep refreshing in our mind to make sure that we have a good understanding of those things so that as we move from class to the next class, that we're getting better and understanding those topics. Have a good day, everyone.